Printer settings. We're going to go backstage and change some of the printer settings. We're going to set a contiguous range of pages that's a subset of the pages in our print job. We're going to see settings that allow us to print one-side or two-sided documents. We'll be able to collate our documents, change the orientation from portrait to landscape or vice versa, select the paper size, change the margins, adjust the scaling, and we'll take a look at the old school dialog box. So we're looking again at the list of the industries traded on the NASDAQ exchange with some statistics associated with those industries. We're going to go back and set some printer settings and change some printer settings. In the Backstage area, Control P. The first thing we can do, we have 6 pages that will print out if we send this print job to the printer. But we can pick a contiguous subset of those range of pages. For instance, 2 to 4 with the spin buttons. I can also enter numbers directly into the field, 3 to 4. This allows you to print a contiguous range that's a subset of the pages that are set in your print job. The next option, I'll click the drop down. We can print one-sided, which is the default way to print the print job. Or we can print both sides where we flip the page either on the long edge or the short edge. Now my printer, I have to do that manually. You may have one that does it automatically. You may also see some settings listed here that I don't have because I've got a fairly simple printer. I'll escape out of that. The next option is collated. We can choose to have the print job collated or not. You probably already know what collated is. If not, you can look at the visual display and figure it out pretty quickly. I'll escape out of that and drop down to the portrait orientation or the landscape orientation, the two choices to set up the pages to either be portrait, which is what we currently see in the print preview, or landscape, which would orient the paper with the long side horizontally. And again, you may see some different options here because the settings that we are changing in Excel are the settings that are available to change in your printer itself. So you see orientation, portrait, and landscape. I can change that setting where we were, or I can change it here by left-clicking landscape, clicking OK, and now we have the landscape orientation. Now, we made the situation worse, actually, because I started with 6 pages, and now we are currently looking at 8 pages, and what our goal is to get it down to 1 readable page. But I'm going to leave that for the time being. The next option we have is the paper size, which is currently set at 8.5 by 11, the letter size. You can select one of the other ones here, but I don't have the paper legal loaded into my hopper. If I choose that, I'll need to put legal size paper in my hopper. But to change the print preview, which is what I'm after, I'm going to left-click legal. And now we went from 8 pages to 4 pages. So assuming I had the legal size paper, I could print this and at least decrease the number of pages that my print job will print out on. But moving on, I have normal margins. Left-click that. I also have the ability to choose the last custom setting. I can choose wide margins, or I can choose narrow margins. Or on the bottom, I'll left-click and find I can have a dialog box pop up where I can manually click the spin buttons to adjust the top and the bottom, the left and the right margins, and the spacing for the header and the footer. I can also choose to center the content on the page either horizontally or vertically, and I can left-click this options to get to my printer settings directly and change some of the settings this way. I'll left-click OK, left-click OK, and move down to scaling, which is set at no scaling, but I also have the ability to fit all the content on one page. I'll left-click that. I've got data that's oriented in a portrait fashion, but I have my page oriented in a landscape fashion. So this mismatch is causing my schedule to shrink down to the point where I probably can't read it if I print it out. So I'm going to drop down and left click the next option, which is fit all columns to one page. That's readable, but I'm back to 4 pages, but at least the columns are grouped onto one page and they are not flowing over into multiple pages. The next option is fit all rows on one page. That looks exactly like the first choice, because to get all the content on one page, we also had to fit all the rows on one page, and it in effect is exactly the same result. Left click one more time, go to custom scaling options. Here is yet a third way to change the orientation. In the center we have the scaling options. The radio button is on for fit to 0 pages wide by 1 pages tall. The print preview shows us exactly that. We also have the ability to select the paper size, and we have the options button that takes us again to our printer settings directly. Left click OK, left click OK. The last thing we have showing at the bottom of the list is page setup. When I left click that, I get what used to be the only way to set the printer settings and change the printer settings. This is the old school printer dialog box, and we've seen these things already. We just saw this one when we were adjusting the scaling, and I'm going to use this dialog box to change to the portrait view, which it didn't take effect immediately. It will take effect after I close the dialog box. We also saw the margin part of this dialog box, and I'll leave the header, footer, and sheet for another movie. When I left click OK, my print preview is updated, and we get really what we're after. Maybe this is the best we can hope for. We have all of our content on one page. We adjusted the page orientation to landscape, which didn't work, and we adjusted it back to portrait, which fits our data better. We have a legal sized page, which also fits our data better. We've chosen normal margins. The margins didn't have any effect because our data was narrow enough to fit on the page. And we chose fit all rows on one page, which in effect puts all of our content on one page because the schedule is fairly narrow. We may be able to actually print this out and read it. So those are the printer settings. We found that we could choose a subset, a contiguous range of pages within the larger group of pages that are set in our print job. We can choose to print one-sided or two-sided. We can set the printer up to collate our print job. We can change the orientation from portrait to landscape or landscape to portrait. We can select the paper size. We can adjust the margins. And we can change the scaling. We can do all of these things by utilizing the Excel settings functionality, or by changing the printer properties directly, or by going into the page setup dialog box or the old school dialog box and change the settings that way.